All right, our next guest comes to us from South America. So we've kind of gone to one extreme. We've gone England. Now we're going to go to South America. I don't think you currently live in South America right now, do you, Jaime?
Hello, good afternoon. Well, afternoon here.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, well, actually, no. At this moment, I'm located in Maine, United
Oh, okay.
States.
In Maine. Yep. But originally
Yes,
from originally from Bogotá, Colombia.
yes.
Ah,
Yeah,
bienvenido.
so se habla español. If someone need it.
Yep. I served my mission in Barranquilla on the Atlantic,
Ah,
the other part of Colombia, but so we can talk in costeño and it's probably offensive if we call you a cachaco, but that's what they would
well,
call it.
well, actually, more than cachaco, I am Rolo because I was born and raised in Bogota. So usually that
Oh,
is like our word for in Colombia.
oh, okay, okay. All right. Well, yeah, we look forward to hearing from you today. Tell us, just kind of give us a very brief teaser of what we're going to learn, and then we can jump right in.
No, well, in this case, well, my expertise and my professional background here is in animal sciences and agronomy, because actually my focus is in forages and pastures. That has been my focus since my bachelor in animal science back in Colombia, working with tropical grasses. Now, later, I did uh, my PhD in the University of Florida, working still with tropical grasses, but for my background in Bogota, I have also knowledge about cool season grasses, and that is the thing that I'm working here at the University of Maine, working with, well, livestock in general. So
Okay.
the presentation that I'm bringing to this summit today is talking about pastures, of course, but in this case, talking about resilience. How can we maintain and try to adapt our pastures to survive what is happening with the climate change, with the variability in our weather, and how can we maintain some pasture that will prevail?
Got it. Well, cool. Well, let's jump right in. I think it made you co-host, so you should be able to share your screen if you've got a presentation.
Yes, I have. Okay, so this is my presentation. Let me put in the presentation mode. Okay, are you seeing? Yes,
Yep.
are you seeing the presentation, right?
Yes, we can. Yep, looks good.
Perfect, good. Well, as I said before, my presentation is related to building resilience in your pastures. This is a topic that, because I have some experience in warm weather and cool weather, different kind of production. So this is more like general, something that you can apply if you have grazing, if you have pastures on your farm or your operation. As as Jade said, my name is Jaime Garzon. I'm an assistant extension professor and forage educator at the University of Maine Cooperative Extension. And well, I'm glad to be here and be invited. So to start the presentation, I want to show that actually something that we usually refer when we're talking about pastures and that people are imagining is usually they picture this landscape. So actually, when you think in pastures, it doesn't matter if you're in the north or in the south, you are looking for these blue skies, like a very homogeneous green a carpet that is the pasture, some animals over there. And actually, that is like the first approximation. But nowadays, we know that this homogeneous landscape is not what is happening. And that is something that we need to consider. And that is because in all that landscape, a lot of things are happening. So it is not something that are happening homogeneously. It's like all the cycling that is happening between these spheres that compose the landscape. We have the air, we have the soil, we have the plant, and we have the animal, and all the things that is happening between of those. So that is the change that we have that we need to do to build this resilience, is not to think in our pasture as a linear way, just coming soil, plant, animal. No, that is the past. Now we need to start thinking in the cycle in a more holistic way. To another approximation to that perspective is what's happening with the soil fertility. This is not a topic that is new. some different references and meanings about soil fertility say that is the soil ability to sustain agricultural plant growth. And even they go a little further, saying that it's a complex process that involving nutrient cycling between organic and inorganic forms. So you can see that actually across time, that meaning has been more complex. And that will compose in this concept of soil fertility, mineral proportion, aeration, that also related to porosity, water holding capacity, very important for our plants, and the texture. However, nowadays we know that with this concept is very important, of course, but now we know that it's missing some. We need to add another component to this concept, and that is what happened with the alive. The part that is alive in that soil is not only just organic or not only inorganic form. There's things that are living in there and are interacting. And by adding this concept, we now are speaking about soil health. That is the soil continued capacity to function as a vital living ecosystem that sustains plants, animals, and humans. So if you compare the concept that we had before with soil fertility to this one, this is more broad. This is just trying to capture all that spectrum of the cycling that I showed you in the first slide. And like in a more simple way to see it, soil health is the summatory of the inherent soil quality, that is that part of soil fertility that is more inorganic, more like stable, and what happened with the dynamic soil quality. And in this case, we are putting inside that, meaning the microorganisms. So one of the very important concepts, the first one in this presentation, is about talking about the soil health. When we usually try to maintain and to increase the soil health in our pastures, we are increasing, in consequence, the resilience of the system. But in that case, okay, we have like a further concept of what is soil health, but what is composed? So actually, this soil functions that the soil health is composed is all of these different characteristics. The nutrient cycling is just not talking about the nitrogen, the phosphorus, and the potassium that we are applying, but it's also how those are cycling between all those spheres that we talked before. Carbon sequestration and nitrogen fixation, very important concept nowadays because we know the situation with the climate change and the greenhouse gases and the greenhouse effect in our environment. Water infiltration and soil structure, related again with the porosity and that space where microorganisms can live, and weeds and pest controls, that actually by managing a good soil health, that will help us to control the incidences of weeds by the plant part or pests, talking about insects or talking about parasites. For the economic benefits, that also this is very important for farmers. Also, when we maintain a concept of soil health, we will have a better plant growth, quality, and yield. And that is related with the nutrient cycle. By having that soil health, we will have more nutrients that are more available to the plants, and that will be reflected in more yield. And reduces risks of yield loss by environmental stress. That is one of the main concepts when we talk about resilience. And in this case, if suddenly we have a drought or a flood, something that happened with our pastures, maybe the explosion of one pests. Having this soil health and having this concept that I will talk in this presentation will help that pasture to resist those environmental stresses. And at the end, passing that stress just to recover faster. Very important here in Maine, and in these places where we have like the winter very snowy, better field access in wet periods, because here the muddy season is something that is very real. And actually we need to improve the consistency and the structure of the soil for us just to go in with our tractor or with our implements, or even to start, hopefully earlier, the grazing season. And finally, having all these concepts together reduces field costs. Now we're talking about how is those main nutrients that our pastures and for sure later our animals will need. So the main nutrients in here, when we are talking about pastures, we are talking about carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Those are like the main ones, the bigger ones, they are needed in bigger quantities. We also have other nutrients that are needed in less concentration, as happened with, for example, the calcium, the iron, the molybdenum, or the chlorine. And I will start speaking a little more for these main ones. But just for let you know, in this slide, if you are seeing the presentation, in this slide, there are missing two very important nutrients. So if you can check out what are those, I just give you a couple of seconds between I drink my water. Just to let you know, if you are curious, there is two very important elements that are missing in this slide. So maybe later you can put that in the chat if you discover which of those were for plants, right? Not for animals, for plants. Well, continue the presentation. We're talking about now about carbon. Carbon, when we talk about that, the first thing that we thought is one of the first things that we learned when we were in the school, in the even elementary or high school, and in the photosynthesis. That amazing process that will transform radiation, the sunlight, in carbohydrates, actually in fuel for our systems. So for sure, it's very important, of course. That is one of the first biological reactions that appears in our planet from the very beginning. But nowadays, we know that the photosynthesis is still very, very important. When we are talking about pastures, we need to increase the concept to other aspects. And what happened, for example, with the roots. When we're talking about pastures, one thing is what we are seeing above ground, just that green material, the stems, the leaves, even the seed heads that are making our biomass on our pasture. But something that we are not seeing is the amount of roots that are produced by that amount of biomass. And actually, for forages and for grasses, approximately if it's the same amount of biomass that you are seeing above ground, like up the soil, is the same amount of biomass that there is below ground in the shape of roots. Sometimes it's like same proportion, 1-to-1. In some tropical grasses, that is even more a proportion of the roots. So can be 1.5 or below ground to 1 above ground, going to 2, even to 3 times the biomass that you are seeing with the green material. It will be the triple in the roots. So actually, that carbon has been processed by the CO2 that the plant is absorbing by the photosynthesis. So actually, that is what we call nowadays the carbon sequestration. And because of that, that is a concept that for pastures is very, very important, especially if you put a more complex way with your animals talking about silvopasture. Because in this case, we are not only talking about the biomass of the grass, of the herbaceous species, but also what is happening with the trees, with the forbs. In that case, we're having like a longer shape of the roots. We are reaching more layers on the soil, and we are increasing the carbon sequestration. So actually, we are just putting out carbon from the atmosphere and putting that in our soil. Very good advantage. And that at the end is related with a very important concept when we are talking about soils, that is the organic matter. This is very, very important to consider because the organic matter is approximately from 70 to 90% carbon. So actually, that is something that we want to build in our soils. The organic matter is the direct representation of the microorganisms. If you have a good amount of organic matter, you will have a good amount of microorganisms. And by doing that, there will be more nutrient cycling and more release of nutrient decomposition. So one of the benefits of this organic matter, of course, enhance soil structure, because in this case, the microorganisms are also like putting together the particles of the soil. They are improving the stability, the water infiltration, and by doing that, they are also improving the water holding capacity. And for that, it's very important if you have some situation with drought. This water holding capacity is just the key that will adapt or cope this problem with the drought to your pastures. It will reduce the stickiness of the clay and surface crusting. That is a problem when we have like a very heavy soil, a wet period, and after that, like very sunny, that everything starts to be cracked. And that could be a problem because that will later stimulate erosion. It will increase soil cation exchange capacity from calcium, magnesium, and potassium. It will increase the soil buffer capacity. That is something that is very important because the soil, it's now, we know that it's like a live organism, very big organism. So actually this buffer capacity is the thing that will increase the resilience of your pasture as well. It will accelerate mineral soil decomposition, very important for the release of nutrients. And finally, coming together, it will enhance the soil microbial activity. And now well, that is for carbon. And now we talk about nitrogen. And here we can see like something that is seen very common in pastures. That is like one statement that is true. Grasses are always starving of nitrogen. They're always wanting more nitrogen. But you need to be careful because it's not only the situation just to apply nitrogen in form of manure or chemical fertilizer. They need to be controlled. And that's why we have this concept of the 4 R's in the nutrient stewardship. Right source, knowing that, okay, you are applying manure if you're organic, or you're applying chemical fertilization, and which one? Urea, ammonium, or what other? Right rate. Here we're talking about just apply the amount that you know that your plant will need. If your grass is needing, we say 70 pounds of nitrogen per acre, it's not useful that you will apply 100 or 150 because the grass will take the 70 that it needs, and the rest, it will be lost. The right time, very important for those crops that are very, that have a high necessity of nitrogen, for example, cash crops as corn. Usually with this one, it is important is just not to apply all the nitrogen at the same time. Just try to split that to give the time for the plant to absorb all the nitrogen that you are providing. And finally, the right place. And that is like a difference between some of crops that maybe for the micronutrients, it would be better to apply the fertilization on the leaves as a foliar fertilizer than in the soil as a edaphic fertilizer. So usually, as I said, very important with the right rate and the right time. Usually when we're talking about the fertilization is just to apply the quantity that it needs. But previously, like in past decades, from the Green Revolution, we know that actually the idea was just to apply a lot of nitrogen. And that was a reality, excepting on the last years. And that happening is because of the prices of the market. Nowadays, that curve is a little reduced, it's like decreasing a little, but still it's expensive if you want to apply like chemical fertilization in high amounts on your crops, on your areas. That's why, for example, here in Maine, people are more aware, they are just trying to use more organic sources, as happened with the manure that is produced naturally by our dairy and beef productions. However, with the manure, it's important to consider that, okay, of course, it is a very good choice, but the concentration of nutrients is different. And that is something that you need to check with the right fertilization. We have cow manure, we have chicken manure, we have pig manure. So which one of those could be better for your production? Well, that depends, of course. Because, for example, if you can see here in the slide, the dairy manure, it will provide 1.4% of nitrogen and 0.9% of phosphate, that is phosphorus. Look what happened with the poultry. Now we're talking about 3.3 of nitrogen, that much better, you need less on your pasture, but look what happened with the phosphate, it's 4.8. So actually, with this management, it is important that you recognize that if you are applying one nutrient with the manure, you are applying by obligation the other. And that could be a problem in some states, in some places, when you are seeing the ponds, the ditches that start to be very green, a lot of algae growing. And that is happening by that excess of phosphorus or potassium in the manure that people are applying. Because here, usually when you work with fertilizer, that is in the bottom of the slide, you can see because we have a higher concentration, we need to use less. We are talking about pounds per acre. But when we're talking about manure with that low concentration, we're talking about tons per acre. So now extrapolate that those tons per acre with the amount of phosphorus or potassium. And that's why we will see those problems, those issues with some water sources near to our farms. Just for take that into account. We need to maintain the 4 R's, okay? The next, we need the phosphorus. With the phosphorus, there is a particular thing that in the soil, everyone wants the phosphorus. And actually, that will depend more than the availability or more than how much you put in the soil is the pH of the soil. So look, that is like another effect that you need to consider in your soil. If your pH is too acid, that is very typical in grasses, in pastures, because usually where you will put animals, where you cannot put cash crops, because sometimes of the acidity. So usually when we are talking about grasses, pasture, we are talking about pH of 5.5 to 6. In this case, with these acids, the phosphorus will be linked, will be fixed by another elements that are free in the soil, as happened with the iron, the aluminum, and the magnesium. So that's why usually for recommendation, like the best pH to manage these crops, this pasture is 6.5 to 7, a little acid, but not too much. And that is because in that range, the phosphorus, it will be more available. They will, because it's not that acid, those other elements that are fixing the phosphorus are fixed to anything else. And the phosphorus is more available. But beware, if you go more than that pH, the very basic way, now all another elements will come to fix the phosphorus, as happened with the calcium and the magnesium. So that's why you need to be in that window to maybe 5.56 to 7. That is the ideal. And because by managing that pH, you also are helping your soil and your pasture to go against weeds. It will reduce weeds growth and will increase the growth of the pasture, making a good competition against weeds and possible other pests. And because of this, one of the adaptations that plants has for like looking and retrieve more phosphorus to the soil is the mycorrhizae. The mycorrhizae, it's a fungi that actually is making a symbiosis with almost any plant around the world. At the beginning, like some decades ago, people thought that the mycorrhizae was only related to trees, to big trees. Nowadays, we know that actually the mycorrhizae is linked to almost any plant. And by doing that, the mycorrhizae is increasing the area as roots can retrieve in the soil, as roots can reach in that soil just to retrieve nutrients. The mycorrhizae can go further. And even with that, they also are producing some acids that will be more soluble, the phosphorus, and will transport that from the soil to the plant.
About
and now we know even
5 minutes, Jaime.
5?
Yeah, you're on roll here.
Yes, for the 5 minutes of questions. Okay. Yeah, and in this case, I have time. And for the mycorrhizae network, so in this case, we'll also have what happening with plant to plant and what's happening with the multi-networking that actually is communicating between plants. So it's another important concept we were talking about phosphorus. And now another concept that I want to give you, because I'm short of time, is the fodder diversification. Something that is important is that actually here in the United States, and actually around the world, it is very important to increase the number of species that you can have on your pasture. That concept that only have one species in all the pasture is not an appropriate way to increase the resilience. And by doing that, it is important that you notice where are you located. Do you have a cool season, like the winter, when the winter finishes, you have summer slump? So maybe you have the possibility to grow like warm species of grasses. Maybe you have both, as happened here in Maine, for example. We have a cool season, and we also have a warm season in summer. So that is the situation where you have to decide which species you can plant. And as a quick example, here I brought you some of the species here in cool season that are very good for grazing. We have the Timothy and the Kentucky bluegrass. Both of those are very well adapted to acid soils, that are very persistent, and they will survive fine in wet or dry soils. If you had wet soils, you can go with the red canary grass. If you had dry soils, you can go with the smooth brown grass. Just like an example for cool season grasses. By going more to the south, we have the warm season grasses. These are perennial as well. So we have the Bermuda grass and the Bahia grass, that both of those grow very well in well-drained soils. And we also have the limpo grass that will be very well adapted to wet soils. In this case, in warm weather. But remember that we're talking about diversification. It's not only grasses. Look about what the legumes are. And actually, the legumes, they are not only like increasing the diversity in our pasture, they are also providing another ecosystem services in our plants. So we have the provisioning as increasing the forage yield and the quality of that pasture. They are providing the nitrogen fixation and increasing litter decomposition. They are regulating greenhouse gases emissions and increasing diversity. So actually look at all those services that the legume, just by having that in your pasture, will increase. And just for an example, look for the nitrogen fixation. That is something that is like one of the main things of legumes. If you are worried that fertilization is expensive, this is one of the choices that you have, because the legume will grow on your pastures, will fix nitrogen, and will increase the quality of the diet of your animals. And look at this table. We have, just by having a cover crop, 100% of that legume that is covering all the place, or if we're having 30% of cover, that is the recommendation for in general in pastures. By doing that, look, for example, the alfalfa with the 30% of cover is just providing per year 50 to 90 pounds of nitrogen. Going with red clover, very common, 25 to 40 pounds of nitrogen per acre per year. Going to warm weather, the perennial peanut, that is a legume very well used in Texas, in Florida, in Mississippi. They are fixing 25 to 50 pounds. Or the chinomene, that is well adapted for wet soils, that is reaching to 20. These concepts are important because when we are talking about grazing pastures, this is usually related to like an exigency of 50 pounds of nitrogen per acre. So actually, by having the legume, you are having that already fulfilled, and now you don't need to apply any fertilization.
Okay, so we probably better wrap up here, Jaime. So we are just about out of time. Just if you want to share your contact information.
I will just say goodbye, because I have like the another one, just to say the pasture management related to frequency, testing, and timing. I'm sorry, I don't have time to explain this, but it's just basically avoid overgrazing. That is the summary of this. Please avoid overgrazing. Usually when you are grazing, you need to allow your animals to go no more further than 4 inches of residue. If you allow to go more than 4 inches when the animal is grazing, you will have problems later and you will have degradation of your pastures. And for sure, you don't want to have that situation.
Perfect.
And at the end, well, this is my information. Just if anyone has some questions, you can reach me out. I will be connected a little more, but if not, there are my cell phone numbers, my email addresses, and if you want, just follow me on my social network, professional, of course. Well, thank you very much for your attention. I'm sorry for the time.
Oh, that is perfect. Yep, I know 30 minutes goes by really fast, and you can tell you're super passionate about what you do, and we appreciate bringing your context from, both the warm season, the cool season, and again, these principles apply no matter where we're at in the world. So yeah, definitely send Jaime some gratitude in the chat. We appreciate you. Thank you, Jaime. Very good.